Welcome to Court of Secrets, where real crimes meet cinematic storytelling. If you love true crime stories told like movies, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the truth hiding behind the headlines. Now, today's case is one that shocked everyone. A teenage girl walks into court smiling, calm, confident, certain she's about to walk free. But when the video plays, that smile disappears. This is the story of teen smiles in court, thinks she's going home, then the video plays. She smiled like it was all over, as if the worst part had passed, and she was moments away from freedom. Her hands rested calmly on the defense table, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. The courtroom was heavy with tension, but she looked almost relaxed. The kind of relaxed that makes you think she already knew the outcome. The kind of confidence that says, I'm walking out of here today, but what she didn't know, what no one in that room expected, was that everything was about to change. Because in just a few minutes, a single video would play. And that video would destroy everything she thought she'd gotten away with. The girl in the courtroom was 17-year-old Kaylee Turner, a high school senior who, just months earlier, had been the center of her small town's sympathy. To everyone, she was the pretty honor student, the cheerleader, the girl who'd lost her best friend in a tragic accident. The community had cried for her, rallied around her, and believed her every word. But behind that sympathetic smile was a secret that had been buried, literally. That morning, Kaylee had arrived in court wearing a pale blue blouse, her hair perfectly styled, looking more like someone headed to a school event than a sentencing hearing. Her attorney leaned over, whispering something that made her grin. Maybe it was reassurance that the prosecution hadn't proven intent. Maybe it was a reminder that she was still a minor, and that the judge might show leniency. Whatever it was, she believed she had already won. The prosecutor, though, wasn't smiling. He had been quiet all morning, pacing, waiting for the right moment. He knew the case had been complicated. No witnesses, conflicting statements, and a defendant who had turned public opinion in her favor. But then came the evidence. A phone, a file, a video that had been recovered just days before the final hearing. It was a video Kaylee thought she'd deleted forever. As the judge gave a small nod, the courtroom lights dimmed. A screen flickered on. Kaylee's smirk faded slightly, but she tried to keep her composure, glancing at her lawyer for reassurance. Then the footage began to play. It wasn't grainy. It wasn't unclear. It was horrifyingly real. The video showed two girls near the edge of a lake. The camera wobbled slightly as one laughed, recording the other. It was sunny, peaceful, the kind of day you'd never think could end in tragedy. Kaylee's voice was unmistakable, bright, teasing, playful. The other girl, Amber Reed, laughed back, unaware that those were the last moments of her life. Then the tone shifted. Kaylee's voice grew sharp. The laughter stopped. She said something, too quiet to hear, but her expression changed completely. She moved closer. Amber backed away, nervously smiling, thinking it was still a joke. But the camera caught everything. The push, the scream, the splash, the silence that followed, and then the worst part. Kaylee walked up to the camera, looked directly into it, and smiled. In the courtroom, no one moved. The only sound was the soft whirring of the playback system. Kaylee's attorney froze, his face pale. Across the aisle, Amber's parents clutched each other, tears streaming down their faces. The judge leaned forward, expression unreadable. Kaylee's mask of confidence shattered. She tried to look away, but the video kept rolling, showing her walking back toward her car, adjusting her hair, and casually saying, "She shouldn't have messed with me." That was it. 5 seconds of footage. But it was enough to change everything. When the lights came back on, Kaylee's expression was gone. The smirk, the calm, all of it replaced by shock. Her hands trembled as she whispered something to her lawyer, but he didn't respond. There was nothing left to argue. The prosecutor stood. His voice was steady, but every word hit like a hammer. "Your Honor, this is not an accident. This is not a moment of panic. This is premeditated. This is murder. The defense tried to recover, arguing that it was a prank gone wrong, that Kaylee hadn't meant to push her friend so hard, that she'd panicked afterward. But no one in that room was buying it anymore. The video had shown a side of her no one could unsee. The judge called for order as murmurs spread through the courtroom. The jury members avoided Kaylee's eyes. Even the bailiffs looked unsettled. For months, Kaylee had played the part perfectly. The grieving best friend, the innocent bystander, the victim of gossip and rumors. She'd cried on camera, posted tributes online, attended the vigil, even delivered a shaky eulogy. The town had pitied her, believed her, but that smile at the end of the video told the truth her tears never could. And now, sitting in that courtroom, watching her own face on the screen, Kaylee finally understood. She wasn't going home. As the video ended, the judge leaned forward, voice low and deliberate. "Miss Turner," he said, "this court has seen deception before, but rarely have we seen it worn as confidently as you have worn yours." Kaylee didn't respond. Her eyes darted toward the door, maybe imagining herself walking out, back to her old life. But there would be no escape this time, because the moment that video played, her freedom was gone. The courtroom stayed frozen for a long moment after the video ended, no one daring to speak, no one even breathing too loudly. The silence was heavy, thick with disbelief and anger. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall over a room, it crushes it. Kaylee sat perfectly still, eyes glassy, her once perfect posture slumped. Her face had drained of all color, and her lips trembled as she tried to form words that wouldn't come. Her attorney leaned toward her, whispering something desperate, but she didn't seem to hear him. She just kept staring straight ahead, at the screen that had just destroyed her life. Amber's mother broke first. A strangled cry escaped her, loud and raw, echoing through the courtroom. "You smiled," she sobbed. "You smiled while my baby died." The bailiff stepped forward to calm her, but the damage was done. Kaylee flinched like she'd been struck. For months, she had told herself that it wasn't her fault, that the push was an accident, that Amber had lost her balance, that no one would ever know what really happened. But now everyone knew, and the one thing she could never take back, the smirk, was burned into their memories forever. The prosecutor took a slow step forward. "Your Honor," he said, his voice measured but cutting, "that video speaks for itself. It's not just evidence, it's a confession. The defendant's own actions, her own words, captured in real time. There is no doubt left as to her intent." Kaylee's lawyer rose quickly, trying to salvage what was left. "Your Honor," he began, "we don't deny that the footage is disturbing, but what you saw was a terrible accident. Two teenagers, emotions high, a moment of impulsive anger. Kaylee never intended for anyone to die." The judge looked at him, unimpressed. "And the smile afterward?" he asked quietly. The defense lawyer hesitated. There was no good answer. Kaylee's breathing quickened. She looked like she wanted to vanish into her chair. Every pair of eyes in the courtroom was fixed on her, the girl who had cried on camera, who had given interviews saying she missed her best friend every single day. The same girl who, when the cameras weren't rolling, had said, "She shouldn't have messed with me." That sentence, those 5 words, had become the prosecution's anchor. They replayed it in court over and over, letting it hang in the air like poison. Each time it echoed, it chipped away at the last traces of the innocent victim image Kaylee had worked so hard to maintain. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already gathering, unaware that inside, everything was falling apart. The case that had once divided the town was now unmistakably clear. The truth had surfaced, and it was uglier than anyone wanted to believe. When the judge finally called for a recess, Kaylee stood up slowly, her hands shaking. The bailiff gestured for her to follow procedure, but she hesitated, glancing toward Amber's parents. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, maybe to apologize, maybe to plead, but no words came. Amber's father just stared at her, his face expressionless, but his eyes full of something far colder than anger. Back in the holding room, Kaylee's composure cracked completely. She sank onto the bench, sobbing into her hands. Her lawyer sat across from her, his tone shifting from frustration to resignation. Kaylee, they have you on video. That smile, it killed your case. She shook her head violently. I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. But it did, he said softly. And now they've seen the real you. The rest of the day felt like a blur. Witnesses testified. Friends, classmates, even one of Kaylee's teachers. They all spoke about the tension between the two girls before Amber's death. The rumors, the jealousy, the way Kaylee had seemed obsessed with being the perfect one. Each statement painted a clearer picture, a girl who needed to win, no matter what it cost. When court reconvened, the air was thick again, charged with emotion. The judge looked weary, as though the weight of what he'd seen still lingered with him. He turned to Kaylee. Miss Turner, he said slowly, do you have anything you'd like to say before this court delivers its decision? Kaylee stood, trembling. She looked smaller now, her confidence gone, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt her, she said. We were just arguing. I thought she'd come back up. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Tears streamed down her face. I wish I could take it back. I really do. The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Regret, he said, is only meaningful when it comes before your court. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Kaylee's knees nearly buckled. The judge continued. This was not a momentary lapse of judgment. It was cruelty. Cold, deliberate, and followed by deception. You lied to investigators. You lied to the public. And you smiled. He paused, letting the silence stretch. That smile told this court everything it needed to know. Amber's mother began to cry again, clutching her husband's arm. Kaylee's parents sat in the back row, their faces pale, their world collapsing around them. When the judge finally spoke again, his voice was firm, unflinching. This court finds you guilty of second-degree murder. Kaylee's breath caught. Her hands gripped the table, as though holding on to the last bit of reality she had left. The room spun. The crowd murmured. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered, she thought she was going home, but she wasn't. As the bailiff approached, Kaylee looked over her shoulder one last time, toward the doors that led outside. The life she'd once had was on the other side, slipping away with every step, and when they placed the cuffs around her wrists, the faint metallic click echoed louder than the judge's final words. She'd smiled once, believing it was all over, but now she finally understood. It was only just beginning. The gavel struck once, a single, heavy sound that sealed her fate. Kaylee Turner stood motionless, her wrists bound, as the reality of the verdict sank in. Around her the courtroom erupted, some crying, some whispering, others simply staring in disbelief. The cameras, the same ones that once captured her fake tears and practiced grief, now zoomed in on her face again. But this time there was no smile, no mask. Just fear, the judge's voice echoed faintly through her mind, repeating the words she couldn't escape. Guilty of second-degree murder. The bailiff led her toward the side door, her hands trembling against the cold steel cuffs. Every step she took sounded louder than the last, like the walls themselves were listening. Behind her, Amber's parents held each other tightly, shaking with silent sobs. For them, justice had come, but it didn't feel like victory. It never does. Outside, the world was already waiting. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones ready, cameras flashing like lightning. News tickers blared her name in bold red letters. Teen killer, sentenced after shocking video evidence. But inside the jail transport van, it was quiet. Kaylee stared out the small barred window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The same face that once smiled confidently at the world now looked hollow, empty, almost unrecognizable. In her mind, she replayed everything, the argument, the push, the splash, the silence, the laughter she once faked, the tears she forced, the moment she thought she'd gotten away with it. She remembered the interviews, the candlelight vigil, the way people hugged her and told her she was so brave, how she posted photos of Amber with captions about friendship and loss. She'd played her part perfectly, but she'd never expected that phone, the one she'd dropped near the lake, to be found. That one forgotten device had done what no one else could. It told the truth. In the days that followed the verdict, the story consumed the country. Every news outlet ran it. The smiling teen killer, the betrayed best friend, the video that changed everything. Comment sections exploded with rage. Some people said she was pure evil. Others blamed social media pressure, saying she'd lost touch with reality. But one thing everyone agreed on, that smile, cold, proud and unremorseful, was unforgettable. In her small hometown, the impact was devastating. The same classmates who once supported her now whispered her name in disgust. The school took down her cheerleading photo. Her trophies were removed from the display case. No one wanted to be associated with her anymore. Amber's family, meanwhile, tried to rebuild what was left of their lives. They spoke briefly to the press, saying no sentence could ever bring their daughter back, but at least the truth was out. Now, Amber's mother said softly, people will know who she really was. While the outside world dissected every second of the trial, Kaylee's world shrank to a 6-by-8-foot cell. Grey walls, a metal bed, a tiny window that let in just enough light to remind her of everything she'd lost. She was sent to a juvenile correctional facility to serve the start of her sentence. But even there, the other inmates knew her story. Some taunted her, some just stared. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone had seen that smile. At night, she'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the echo of Amber's scream in her mind. The sound never faded. Neither did the image of herself walking away, camera still rolling, eyes full of defiance. It haunted her. Weeks later, her attorney visited her to discuss an appeal. She looked up from the table, eyes red, voice hoarse. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" He paused, unsure how to answer. "You're asking the wrong question," he said quietly. "You should be asking if you'll ever forgive yourself." She didn't respond. She just looked down at her hands, the same hands that pushed, the same hands that smiled into the camera, the same hands that were now chained. The appeal went nowhere. The evidence was too strong, the video too damning. And the judge's statement had already set the tone for her future. This court believes rehabilitation is possible, but accountability must come first. As her sentence began, media interest slowly faded. The world moved on, chasing new stories, new scandals. But for the people in that town, for Amber's family, for the classmates who lost 2 friends that day, the story never ended. They still drove past the lake sometimes. The water was calm now, still reflecting sunlight the way it used to. But for them, it would always be a graveyard, a place where innocence drowned with the truth. Months turned into years. Kaylee's face, once known across the internet, faded from headlines. Her social media accounts were deleted. Her old friends grew up, graduated, moved away. But every so often, someone would stumble upon the story again, rewatch the footage and whisper, "That's her, the girl who smiled." Inside the facility, Kaylee kept mostly to herself. She read books, avoided fights, and tried to disappear. But no matter what she did, the guards, the counselors, the other girls, they all remembered. One counselor, an older woman named Denise, once asked her, "Why did you smile that day?" Kaylee didn't answer for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Because I thought I'd won." Denise stared at her, eyes soft but unflinching. "And now?" Kaylee looked up, tears welling again. "Now I wish I hadn't." The counselor nodded. "That's what guilt feels like. It doesn't go away. You just learn to live with it." And as the cell door closed behind her that night, the weight of those words settled deep in her chest. The girl who once smiled in the face of guilt now lived in silence. Haunted by the truth she couldn't delete, she thought she was going home that day, but she never did. The first year behind bars changed her faster than the verdict ever could. Gone were the bright clothes, the polished hair, the practiced cheerleader smile. In their place stood a girl who moved quietly, head down, in grey prison cotton and worn-out shoes. The guards called her by her number now. The other inmates called her Smiley. It wasn't meant kindly. Every night the same dream came, the lake, the laughter, the scream. She'd jolt awake before the splash, gasping, hand pressed against her chest. At first she tried to tell herself it was just guilt, a thing she could eventually outgrow. But as the months dragged on, Guilt became routine, like the clang of the morning count, the rattle of food trays, the distant shouts echoing down the hallway. Kaylee learned the rhythm of the facility: breakfast at 6, chores at 7, classes until noon, therapy in the afternoon. The staff wanted her to reflect. The other girls wanted her to stay out of the way. Most of them had stories of their own: addiction, neglect, violence, but none had a viral video floating around the internet. Some nights, they'd pass around an old tablet the guards allowed for movie hour, and someone would whisper, "Hey!" and that's her. Kaylee would look away before the thumbnail loaded, but she knew what they saw. That frozen image of her standing at the water's edge, sunlight glinting in her hair, that half smile on her lips. The counselors encouraged journaling. At first, her pages were empty. Then one day she began to write, not about Amber, but about herself. The lies she told, the thrill of attention, the moment she realized people pitied her. She wrote about how easy it had been to act sad, how natural the tears felt once she realized everyone was watching. She didn't show those pages to anyone. Letters came from home less and less. Her parents visited twice that first year, then stopped coming. Her mother couldn't look her in the eye without crying. Her father couldn't look at her at all. "We just need time," her mother had said through the glass. But time, Kaylee was learning, didn't heal guilt. It just gave it room to grow. One afternoon, Denise, the counselor who'd asked about her smile, found her sitting alone in the library. "You know what forgiveness really means?" Denise asked. "It's not forgetting. It's facing the truth without flinching." Kaylee looked up. "I face it every day," Denise nodded slowly. "No, you relive it." "That's different," the words lingered. That night, Kaylee stared at the ceiling again, replaying the moment the camera fell. She realized she'd spent every day pretending not to care, then every night pretending she still deserved to. 2 years in, the facility hosted a rehabilitation program that let inmates speak to high school students about choices and consequences. When staff suggested Kaylee participate, she refused. "They don't need to hear from me," she said. "They've already seen the video." But Denise insisted. "Maybe that's why they should." The day of the talk, Kaylee stood in front of 20 students in folding chairs. She could feel their judgment before she even spoke. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. "I used to think being sorry meant saying it enough times," she said. "But it doesn't. Being sorry is when you'd give anything to trade places with the person you hurt and knowing you never can." When she finished, the room was silent. A few of the students looked down. One girl in the back wiped her eyes. For the first time in years, Kaylee didn't feel the weight of eyes that hated her, just eyes that saw her. Word of the session spread. Reporters tried to get access again, but the facility refused. They'd already turned her life into a headline once. She didn't need it again. Still, the internet never forgets. Every few months, a new clip of the courtroom video surfaced. Set to dramatic music, uploaded under new titles, the teen who smiled after killing her friend. Comments poured in, strangers dissecting her face, her voice, her motive. Kaylee never saw the new videos directly, but the whispers from staff were enough to remind her the world still defined her by 5 seconds of footage. One evening, she sat on her bunk staring out the narrow window at the streak of orange sunset. "Do you think people can change?" she asked Denise, who was making her rounds. Denise paused. "Change isn't the question, Kaylee. The question is, will you ever let yourself?" Kaylee didn't answer. She just watched the light fade from the wall until the cell plunged back into grey. On the anniversary of Amber's death, the chaplain held a small service in the facility chapel. Only a handful of inmates came. Kaylee sat in the back, head bowed. When the chaplain asked for moments of silence, she whispered one sentence under her breath: "I remember you." It wasn't an apology, not really. It was acknowledgement. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, she slept without dreaming of the lake. Outside the walls, the world continued on. New scandals, new tragedies. The lake where it all happened became a quiet park again. But sometimes visitors claimed to see 2 girls laughing by the water's edge in the reflection, until one turned and smiled. Inside her cell, Kaylee still woke before dawn. She'd press her hand against the cold wall, grounding herself in the present, not the past. She knew she couldn't undo what she'd done, but maybe, just maybe, she could learn to live with who she was now. For a long time, she believed her story ended the day the video played. But as the years unfolded, she realized the real punishment wasn't the sentence. It was the memory she carried, the one she could never delete. She had thought she'd won. Then she thought it was over. But the truth was, this was her forever. 7 years later, the gates finally opened. It wasn't dramatic. No cameras, no reporters, no cheering crowds. Just the slow groan of metal and a guard saying, "You're free to go." The phrase didn't sound real. After all that time, freedom didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a test. Kaylee stepped into the sunlight, blinking against the brightness. Her hair had grown long again, darker than before. The air smelled different, cleaner, louder, more alive. For a moment, she just stood there, unsure what to do with her hands. The world had moved on, and she wasn't sure she belonged in it anymore. There was no one waiting for her outside. Her parents had moved to another town years ago, trying to escape the whispers and stares. The last letter she'd received from her mother ended with, "We love you, but we can't come back from this." So she walked. The halfway house was small, grey, and quiet. It had a thin mattress, a shelf of donated clothes, and a tiny mirror above the sink. When she looked into it for the first time, she didn't recognize the reflection staring back. The girl who once smiled in court had vanished. What was left was someone older, smaller, and painfully aware of every second she'd lost. Her parole officer told her to find work. "You'll need structure," he said. But finding a job wasn't easy when her name brought up old headlines. One search online and employers froze. Some didn't even call back. At night, she'd walk through the empty streets near the halfway house, her hood up, avoiding people's eyes. She could feel the judgment even when no one said a word. Somewhere out there, people still watched the video, still talked about the girl who smiled. She tried to rebuild quietly. She took a part-time cleaning job at a church, working the night shift when no one was around. The pastor knew who she was. Everyone did, but he never mentioned it. One evening, he found her scrubbing the floor of the chapel long after her shift had ended. "You don't have to work this hard," he said gently. Kaylee looked up, voice small. "It helps me forget." He nodded, understanding more than he let on. "We don't get to forget," he said softly. "We just learn how to live with remembering." For a long time, she avoided mirrors, cameras, even her own reflection in store windows. She couldn't stand to see that face, the one everyone recognized. But one day, while walking home, she passed a cafe window and froze. Inside, 2 teenage girls laughed over their phones, their heads close together. One of them had blonde hair like Amber's. Kaylee's stomach twisted. She stood there for a moment watching them, tears filling her eyes. Then she turned and walked away. Months passed. Her routine became predictable: work, counseling, silence. She didn't talk much during sessions until one day, her therapist asked her something that stopped her cold. "What would you say to her if you could?" Kaylee didn't have to ask who she meant. "I'd tell her I'm sorry," she said. "Not for the court, not for the cameras, for real. I'd tell her I ruined both of our lives. I'd tell her that every day I wish I'd stopped myself. But I can't fix it. I can only carry it," the therapist nodded. "And do you think that's enough?" Kaylee shook her head slowly. "No, but it's all I have." One spring morning, she visited the lake for the first time since that day. It looked almost peaceful now, sunlight flickering over the surface, birds gliding overhead. She stood at the same spot where it had all happened, where laughter turned into silence. For a long time, she just stared at the water. Then she whispered, "I'm still here." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't an excuse. Just the truth. As she turned to leave, she noticed a small wooden cross nailed to a nearby tree. Weathered, the paint faded, but still there. Someone, maybe Amber's family, still came here. She knelt down and placed a wildflower beside it, her hand trembling. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said softly. "I just hope you know I remember." When she stood, she didn't look back. That evening she wrote in her journal, the same one she'd started in prison years ago. Her handwriting was different now, less shaky, more deliberate. "Maybe we don't ever stop paying for the worst thing we've done," she wrote. "But maybe, if we face it, we can stop pretending we're the same person who did it." Her parole officer later told her she could apply for early termination of supervision if she kept a clean record. She nodded but didn't respond. Freedom didn't mean much when the world refused to forget. Still, she kept going, slowly, quietly, each day a small step further from the girl in the video. Once, during a grocery run, a woman stopped her. "You look familiar," the woman said, squinting. For a terrifying second, Kaylee froze. Then the woman smiled. "You used to go to Westfield High, right?" Kaylee nodded carefully. "Yeah, a long time ago." The woman nodded back, not recognizing the name. She just said, "You take care now," and walked away. For the first time in years, Kaylee exhaled in relief. Maybe one day her face wouldn't be a reminder anymore. Maybe one day she could just be another person in the crowd. But as she walked home, she knew one thing for sure. No matter how far she went, the world would always remember that moment in court. That smile, that silence, it would never fully disappear. And maybe it shouldn't, because forgetting would mean erasing the truth. And she had spent too long pretending to do that already. Years passed. The headlines faded. The video stopped being shared, at least as often. New stories took over, new tragedies filled the feed. But for those who remembered, her name still carried a shadow. Kaylee Turner lived quietly now. She had moved to another state, changed her last name, and rented a tiny apartment above a thrift shop. The landlord never asked about her past, and she never volunteered it. She worked at a local animal shelter, spending her days cleaning cages, walking dogs, and avoiding eye contact when people thanked her for helping. No one there knew who she was, and that anonymity felt like mercy. Sometimes she'd hear people talk about forgiveness, about moving on, but forgiveness wasn't a word that sat easily in her chest. She didn't think she deserved it, not after what she had done. Instead, she focused on something smaller, trying to be better than she was yesterday. At night, she'd sit by her window, watching the streetlights flicker below. The world outside looked calm, peaceful. But in her head, it was never truly quiet. There were nights when she still heard the splash, still saw Amber's face, still saw that moment frozen in time, the one the video had captured forever. But she no longer ran from it. She had learned to face it, to remember it not as a punishment, but as a reminder. Every morning she woke up and made a choice to live with what she'd done and to never forget why she had to change. On the anniversary of Amber's death, she always took the day off. She'd drive to a quiet place by the water, not the same lake, but somewhere that felt similar, and sit there for hours. She'd close her eyes, whisper a few words, and then toss a single white flower into the current. It was her way of saying she still remembered, that she always would. One year, she received a letter in the mail with no return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky, but careful. Inside was a single line: "People can change, but they can't undo. Keep choosing the right thing." There was no signature, but she didn't need one. She knew who it was from, Amber's mother. Kaylee sat there, holding the letter for a long time, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't peace, but it was something. And in her world, something was everything. From that day on, she started volunteering at a youth program, speaking quietly to teenagers about choices, anger, and regret. She never told them her story directly. She didn't need to. The way she spoke, the way she hesitated between sentences, it said enough. Sometimes one of the kids would ask, "Why do you care so much about this stuff?" And she'd answer softly, "Because I know what happens when you think one mistake won't change everything." Years later, an old reporter tracked her down for a follow-up piece. "Do you think you've redeemed yourself?" he asked gently. Kaylee paused, thinking. "No," she said finally. "Redemption isn't something you get. It's something you keep working toward. Every single day." The reporter nodded, scribbling notes, but she wasn't looking at him anymore. Her gaze drifted out the window, to a small park across the street where children were laughing. Life, she thought, keeps moving forward, even when you're still learning how to forgive yourself. When the interview aired weeks later, her face was blurred. Her name changed again. Viewers didn't know who she was, just that she had once been a girl who made a terrible mistake. But those who remembered knew, and somewhere out there in a quiet town, a family watched the same segment. Amber's parents didn't speak during it. They just held hands. When it ended, Amber's mother whispered, "Maybe that's enough." Kaylee never saw the broadcast. She didn't want to. Some stories weren't meant to be relived, they were meant to teach. And hers had taught her more than she ever wanted to learn. As she locked up the shelter one evening, a golden retriever she'd been caring for wagged its tail and nudged her hand. She smiled faintly, kneeling to scratch behind its ears. "You're a good one," she whispered. The sky above was painted in deep orange and soft pink, the kind of sunset that made the world feel almost forgiving. For the first time in a long time, Kaylee didn't feel the weight of who she used to be. She wasn't the smiling girl in the courtroom anymore. She wasn't the villain on the screen. She was just someone trying every day to do a little good in a world that had once seen her at her worst. And maybe that was the quiet truth no one talks about. Sometimes punishment ends. But consequences never do. They just change shape.